and thank you for being here today. So the topic for today is green financing opportunities for agribusiness. So this webinar is a capacity building webinar under the Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program. And it's targeted at key stakeholders in the Nigerian agriculture sector. It will focus on expert discussions to demystify the concept of green bonds, sustainable finance, and will highlight the support available under the program. Welcome everyone again. We have some new attendees. Welcome. So the COVID-19 pandemic spread like wildfire across the world. Health and lives were affected, businesses disrupted, and as we all know, economies around the world are grappling through this turbulent time. The pandemic has reinforced the primacy of agriculture in the economic terrain, and this webinar could not have come at a better time, given the renewed importance of supply of food and agricultural produce to families, communities, and manufacturing companies across the world. We have eminent personalities speaking to us today from all over the world. But just before I invite the host and the speakers, I want to just go through some housekeeping rules. So kindly ask that all mics be muted. Questions can be lodged in the Q&A session and they'll be answered. During that session. Please refrain from raising your hands throughout the presentation, please, so that we don't have any distractions. And all speakers are to mute their mics until they're introduced to take their sessions. So with that, I'd like to introduce our host for today. Do I have that? I'm pleased to introduce our host, an authority in the Nigerian capital market, Mr. Bola Onadele Koko. He is the Chief Executive Officer of FMDQ Group. He is also the Chairman of FMDQ Private Markets Limited. He serves on the board of FMDQ Securities Exchange Limited. He serves on the board of FMDQ Clear, FMDQ's Depository, and IQX Consult. He's also the chairman of the governance board of the Financial Center for Sustainability Lagos. He'll be giving us an overview today of the Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program. Mr. Onadele, please.
Thank you, Adaze, and good morning all. It's great to be alive. It's good to see those that I can see, Justin and Victor, who are partners to FMDQ. Good to see you, Justin and Victor, and good morning all. You're welcome to the first Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program webinar themed Green Financing Opportunities for Agribusiness. As the world's population expands and at even increasing rate in Africa, meeting a growing food demand and ensuring future environmental security now requires creative financing solutions. The agricultural sector in Nigeria plays a critical role in our economy. It contributes 25% to GDP with great potential for employment generation, food security, and poverty reduction. Despite being endowed with large tracts of arable land and the opportunities within the agricultural sector in Nigeria, that sector remains largely untapped. In actual fact, Nigeria is ranked 7th in the World Bank's December 2019 evaluation of countries' performance in agriculture and farming across Africa. That position puts us behind South Africa, Kenya, and Ghana. Nevertheless, agriculture remains the dominant economic activity in terms of employment and linkages with other sectors of the economy, being a major source of raw materials for agro-allied industries and potent source of foreign exchange. And we'll talk more about this, and I'm sure the panelists will do justice to that. Here in Nigeria, access to finance has been an impediment for the agricultural sector, owing to several factors, but not limited to lacking enabling environments, high transaction costs, as well as lack of capacity to manage industry-specific risks. As we all know, majority of agriculture being practiced in Nigeria is in the informal economy, and the challenge has been how to facilitate the flow of finances into these local investments. The good news, however, is we're all now warming up to the idea of creating structures to make sure that not only can we channel significant amounts of capital into the agricultural sector to ensure food security, export opportunities, raw material processing, amongst others, we can also support agricultural practices that have a positive impact on the environment and also makes a difference in the lives of millions of Nigerians. From improving farm yields for smallholders to increasing mechanization, introducing resilience and reducing emissions intensity, green bonds have the ability to become an attractive financing source for governments, large companies, and even smaller companies that play a crucial, important role in the global food chain. Investors can also use this opportunity to call for sustainable technologies and practices as a financing condition. As demand for agricultural produce for food or as raw material continues to intensify, there's an increase in mechanization in this sector. This consequently ramps up the dependence on energy, green energy, which is an obvious choice. The sector also could benefit from newer technologies such as drip irrigation, anaerobic digestion of manure and crop waste, water management technologies, which are all capital intensive, but serve the dual purpose of increased productivity and environment preservation. Developing the structures to facilitate investment also provides the incentives for investors and farmers to shift to more sustainable practices. Following from Central Bank of Nigeria's resolve to diversify revenues away from crude oil earnings in Nigeria, investments in other areas such as housing, distribution, transport infrastructure via green bonds can only yield positive advancements in this quest. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in interruptions in logistics and global food shortages. The agriculture sector also faces immediate challenges to find ways to produce significantly larger amounts of food to ensure food security, not neglecting the cash crops as a source of earnings for the nation. The challenge in logistics has also affected the movement of agricultural produce to markets. And that is one area the central bank has also decided to support with the infrastructure revolution that's going to take place in Nigeria. In lending a voice to tackling the financing and sustainability questions, FMDQ Group, Financial Sector Deepening Africa, and Climate Bonds Initiative formalized a partnership in March 2018 through the execution of a cooperation arrangement to support the development of the Nigerian green bond market, and consequently the Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program was established. The program, since its official launch in June 2018, has been commendable in achieving part of its strategic objectives of developing the corporate green bond market in Nigeria. This it has done by the achievement of series of bilateral engagements, trainings, and capacity building sessions for different categories of stakeholders in the financial market ecosystem with over 450 participants. And we're very grateful for the role being played by FSD Africa and Climate Bonds Initiative, our partners in this program. The program also supported the development of the Green Bond Issuance Rules by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to enforce transparency and disclosure, thus promoting integrity and accountability in the Nigerian green bond market, as well as championing the issuance of Africa's first climate bond certified corporate green bond by Access Bank PLC in March 2019. As the green bond market continues to expand globally and pressure on the agriculture sector to sustainably increase production grows, green bonds targeting climate smart agriculture and afforestation are becoming a larger feature in the market. To support this, the CBI launched its forest criteria in 2018 and is due to launch its agricultural criteria in July 2020, next month. The federal government has been most supportive in creating an enabling environment for the sector through policies and interventions in conjunction with the Central Bank of Nigeria, such as the Agricultural Credit Guarantee Scheme Fund, which was established as far back as 1977, the Agricultural Credit Support Scheme in 2006, the Commercial Agriculture Credit Scheme in 2009, and more recently, the CBN Anchor Borrower Scheme launched in November 2015. In addition, we also have the Agribusiness Small and Medium Enterprises Investment Scheme under the aegis of the Bankers Committee in 2017, and the Constitution of the National Food Security Council launched in July 2018. These interventions have prompted a fresh wave of investments in Nigeria with bold participation of the private sector. Through the Debt Management Office, the federal government has provided leadership in green bonds by issuing 2 tranches of 10.6 billion in 2017 and 15 billion in 2019, and also 25 billion in 2020, with the third one underway, to engage the domestic market in mobilizing funds for sustainable environmental projects in the areas of solar energy, renewable energy micro-utilities, transportation, and afforestation. This reinforces the fact that Nigeria presents diverse opportunities for long-term green financing from the capital market towards the supply of agricultural inputs and production. Through this webinar, we wish to introduce participants to the concept of green bonds and how the sector can leverage the capital market using these bonds to position the Nigerian agriculture sector as a more developed and sustainable sector. Thank you for joining us on this journey to further develop the Nigerian bond market in the sensitization, advocacy, engagement, and collaboration with critical stakeholders to entrench the principles of sustainability and green finance for recasting the Nigerian economy. I wish you all fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the Chief Executive Officer, FMDQ Group. Thank you, that was very insightful, a very deep overview of the Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program. Now, I'd like to introduce the panelists or the speakers we have here today. I want to welcome new attendees, and also we're streaming live on YouTube. I also want to extend a warm welcome to our participants on YouTube. So for introductions, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Ade Adefeko. He is the Vice President, Corporate and Government Relations at Olam Nigeria Limited. He'll be sharing on what the Nigerian agribusiness stakeholders expect from this webinar. We also have an expert in her field, Ms. Justine Lebel, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer and Director, Market Development at Climate Bonds Initiative, a partner to the Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program. Justine will be speaking on the concept of green bonds, issuance process, the framework, as well as the climate bonds taxonomy and the alignment with the agriculture sector. I'm also pleased to introduce another speaker, Mr. Victor Nkiri. He's a special financial market specialist at Financial Sector Deepening Africa, also a partner of the Nigerian Green Bond, to the Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program. Today, he'll be sharing on driving inclusive capital markets in Africa. It is also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gregory Jobome, the Executive Director, Risk Management Division at Access Bank PLC. He'll be sharing the success story of their green bond issuance, which is Africa's first climate bonds initiative instrument. Finally, we'll be introducing, or we'll also have as a speaker, Mr. Emmanuel Etadiri. He's the Executive Secretary, Financial Center for Sustainability Lagos. He'll be giving us a brief on the activities of FC4S Lagos. And my humble self, I'll be taking the Q&A session and also the vote of thanks. May I introduce Mr. Ade Adefeko? Let me just, 1 second, please. I think we're having some glitches there. I'll just move on to the next presenter, and I'd like to share her presentation. We can always take Ade when he comes on board. Ms. Justine Lebel, I'll share your presentation now.
Thank you, Adazi. Great. So as we're getting that up and running, let me first thank Mr. Onadeli, CEO of FMDQ, the FMDQ team, and of course, the FSD Africa, as all of us coming together as a partnership on what has been so far an extremely successful Nigerian market development program for green bonds. And it's been an honor and a pleasure for CBI to be a part of that. I just want to make one quick correction there, Adazi, on the Access Bank with Greg. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your feedback on the experience that you can share with us all today. It was the first corporate African green bond in all of Africa that was certified. So that's a huge, huge success. Not just for the Nigerian market, but also exemplifying Nigerians' leadership across the continent. So I think that's an important thing to emphasize. Of course, CBI had also certified the first federal government, the sovereign green bond back a couple years ago. So, right. So I think stepping back just a bit, we heard most importantly how the agribusiness sector is instrumental to Nigeria's economy. I think that it goes without saying that, especially in light of the COVID pandemic that we saw across the world, where food security became the first of everybody's concern around the world, particularly because of its vulnerability to supply chains, global supply chains. And so it wasn't necessarily so much an issue of the supply of food, of what we had internationally. It was very much down to a shift of demand. So for example, when you saw in India where things became very evident that they were going to be shutting down their doors and their borders, immediate assumptions became the access to those supply chains for various food products. And therefore that demand started to shift to other economies, most notably in the Northern American region. So that just gives you a sense of the fact that when we find ourselves in these sudden shocks into our system, how well prepared are we to be able to create balance and ensure that we are able to sustain ourselves under such crises. I'm going to be discussing green bonds. Just I want to step back a bit and give you a run through for many of you that are joining us today. Maybe this is the first time you've even heard about green bonds. And I do want to make it clear that, you know, what I will be running through is obviously the rise of that market and what has been developing. But it's the mechanics around it in terms of the identification of green and the process for labeling the product would also remain to be the same. Sorry, if you could go back the first slide, please. It still continues to remain to be where we have the same rules of the game for green loans, for any kind of a green investment funds, and of course, any kind of DFI catalytic funds that are targeting green investments. So I just want to highlight that. I'll draw that out again as examples as we go along, because when we talk about the agribusiness, we know that it's not just limited to bond financing. In many cases, if a very immature capital market, it will be very difficult to issue straightforward bonds. So there is a plethora of different debt instruments and funding type mechanisms we can use, where many of the principles still relate to be the same. But just quickly to say, where is this coming from? And I think it's important to note that what we have seen over the course of the last 10, 15, 20 years is this rising demand coming from the institutional investor base around the world on, and most notably, I should say, originating out of the Northern European buyers, is this demand for better investments in the sense that they are delivering on some sort of impact, but more importantly, it's addressing risk that they're currently assessing in their portfolios. So if we see that we begin to start taking into account non-financial risk outside of traditional corporate governance risk and so on, we start to recognize that, you know, even things like climate impacts on our asset bases is starting to take effect. Policy changes that are happening that are affecting our assets and causing stranded assets. We've most notably seen this in the oil and gas industry. If you looked at the US market in the recent months, the feds have taken up a significant amount of junk debt tied to the shale and gas industry, of which now it's exposed itself to significant amount of stranded assets. And that is very much a compounded effect of both COVID and price issues around that. So those are the types of things that investors are beginning to look at. And so 10 years ago, this movement towards demanding from the World Bank and IFC and European Investment Bank to give them green investment products, in itself came the green bonds. So you have your sovereign wealth, you have your insurances, you have your pensions. We have about 100 trillion of assets under management internationally. And if we're focusing on Nigeria, even in that sense, the pools of pension fund capital is exceptional, and it's one of the largest in the continent. But the most important thing to note is that tapping that capital has to be responsible. This is not about taking a hit for green. This is very much about getting a return, while at the same time you end up having a positive response from your investment. So next slide, please. So what are green bonds? Well, green bonds are like any other debt instrument. Next slide, please. They are just simply it's about what they're financing. Sorry, thank you. That's the slide. Perfect. Thank you. So fundamentally, green bonds follow all the same traditional expectations of regular bonds. There are two major differences. One is what they're financing. 100% proceeds are going to eligible projects and assets that fit within the green universe of what's eligible. And second to that is the transparency and disclosure around what is being financed. And I'll go into a bit more detail in that in a minute, but you'll see that the reporting component there is all about the transparency and disclosure. It is allowing the investor to know very clearly where its capital is going and making sure that it's being managed responsibly. And then finally, of course, the entity. Anyone can issue a green bond as long as they can issue bonds and they have the portfolio to tie it to. Next slide, please. So the number one question is always, going back to the previous slide, please. The number one question is always around the benefits. So as an issuer, why would I issue green bonds? Well, first of all, the investor diversification is significant. It is one of the driving forces to why IFC continues to be a repeat issuer in this space. Because since 2013, when it first issued its first inaugural €1 billion bond, it picked up about 25 new investors on average. And so that was enough to keep them coming back to market alone. We are starting to see price pressure in the international market. So lower cost of capital is very much starting to become a realization. And there are evidence that issuers are experiencing anywhere to 30 to 60 base points per issuance. Oversubscription is the norm. To give you an example, even in the time of COVID impact, we had 3 major energy companies issue green bonds, all tied to renewable energy projects that all came with added benefits. Oversubscription was about 12-fold. The investors that come in the first time tend to come in on all the bonds that come after. And of course, tighter yields and the ability for enhancing the reputation. This is the effort that goes into putting your green bond together. What comes out of it is a huge marketing opportunity, and we'll hear a little bit about that from Greg today. Next slide, please. So here you get a sense of what I'm talking about in growth. Back in 2014, where we started to see outside of the IFC issuance, in 2013, we began to see a number of players coming in, and it started to become, a market of its own. 40 billion of issuance in 2014. But then, as you can see, this exponential growth, and into 2019, we closed at close to 260 billion. And we're still seeing significant issuance coming out into the 2020 period. And the diversity of issuers is anywhere from non-financial to financial corporates, asset-backed securities. We've seen local government issuances, huge wave of sovereigns. In fact, what is really fantastic is to know that Nigeria was actually one of the first sovereign issuers of the global market. And so since then has been a repeat issuer, and we've had a diverse bucket of different types of issuers coming all over the world. In 2015, China started to pay attention to this market. And in 1 year, in 2016, managed from going to 0 issuances to about 36 billion in 1 year. And that in itself created this flurry of issuances coming out of the emerging markets. So it no longer was just a story limited to Europe. It wasn't a story just limited to the United States. It was a global development story. And that's what's been really exciting about this. Next slide, please. I do want to hone in more specifically to Sub-Saharan Africa, and this slide, especially the image, is kudos to my dear colleague, Aneli Makawaza, in case she is listening in from Igugu Global. I think it's really important to show what we're seeing in Africa outside of the issuances that we've seen out of China, because China does tend to overweight the issuances coming out of the American market if you look at it as a whole. So here you can see the separation of issuance in comparison. But at least there's to say that, you know, we have seen capital flows happening on this continent, and that is really exciting, with Nigeria taking quite a strong lead, again, with the federal government level and in the corporate space. And of course, Kenya, with its first green bond issued last year, Acorn Investments, which Victor can highlight the details around that. You know, and of course, South Africa had some city level issuances that we saw, particularly out of Western Cape. But the main take home story here is it can be done here, right? And it's just a matter of making sure we have all the mechanics in place, both on investor and issuer side, to help make it happen. Next slide, please. So just to give you a visual of the different types of areas of investments, you'll see that energy does tend to dominate, rightfully so. It's the most well understood investment landscape when it comes to the renewable energy space. We've had time to operationalize those assets, and therefore they're now becoming quite suitable for debt financing. Of course, buildings also an asset class that is very well known to debt, and with energy efficiency integrated into those portfolios, there begins to become an opportunity for green bond issuance. As you move up, you start to see other areas such as transport, which has been a big one for city level issuances, public mass transit systems, anywhere from BRT to rail lines to metro lines, et cetera, all of those contributing to the low carbon agenda, and most importantly, a massive social impact by developing those projects. In addition to that, you look to see land use as the very green slither there. And it's not to say, well, hold on, that's quite small. Why is that the case? With many of our listeners today, I'm very focused on the agribusiness. What much of the world has been waiting for is, what do we mean by green when we talk about agribusiness, which I will discuss a little bit more detail as we go along. The main take-home message here is that there are opportunities. We are seeing issuances, and again, it's not just limited to the developed economies. And in fact, one of Nigeria's first green bonds at the government level had afforestation and land use projects in there. So giving some notable examples that this can actually hold true. Next slide, please. So, but before going into the specifics, of course, within the agri domain, I think we need to ensure that we understand that when we do go to label our debt product, there are some rules of the game. And in the early part of the development market, it was about 2014 that we saw the entrance of the green bond principles. Now, the green bond principles is something that was established by a set of global banks that soon developed itself into a community of all different market segments, including the investment community. And it is quite a large membership group that represents countries from all over the world of their different market segments, and feeds into 4 very key principles when coming to label your bond. As an issuer, you are focusing on the use of proceeds, right? So what is your project selection? What is your portfolio built upon? What are you using and referencing to identify eligible projects for your bond? The second part is very much around how you're going to manage the proceeds. Are you ring fencing account, which is exactly what we saw with the DMO for the Nigerian government bond issuances, where it was set aside and based off of the performance and delivery of material, funds would be released for the projects themselves? Or are you having a tracking system in place, which many banks tend to use and leverage, which you have transparency around that, that tracking system, and you report on it regularly. The reporting is an annual based reporting for the life term of the bond. So if you have a 5-year bond, every year you will produce a report that will say that you are still in compliance of your green credentials and managing the proceeds accordingly. External review is strongly recommended. And in fact, it is one of those that is expected by investors. And that's where you're having a verification. And we'll hear a little bit about that from Greg later on what that process entails. The standards and certification scheme that CBI put in place to help bring rigor and a process around the green bond principles is something that, as you look to, if you go back to the slide, please, that's a good slide, we stay there. Then you have a framework that can help you with being able to do your bond. Now, where I say consistent rules support market growth, this is where many of the regulatory regimes around the world in their market started to pay attention and looked at the green bond principles, looked at the climate bond standard and taxonomy, and said, how do we bring that into our local markets? And so most notably in Nigeria, we had the SEC working with FMDQ and other players to help integrate that into local market rules. And so the SEC has done that specifically to target the corporate market in Nigeria. But of course, we have seen that a similar exercise take place across the world. Next slide, please. So the next slide now, this one, if we could go back to the other one, please. Yes, this one is about the steps. So I, as an issuer, have a portfolio of green projects that I'm interested in issuing a bond. So I will put together my green bond framework. The green bond framework basically has the 4 pillars that I had just discussed from the green bond principles into a document that then is identifying your projects and assets to be associated with bond, put in place project selection processes and select eligible projects, set up accounts, and process to earmark and allocate the proceeds, get a pre-issuance external review, and go on the roadshow. Again, we'll hear a bit of those details from Greg later on in the webinar. Next slide, please. The Green Bond Framework is something that is capturing your environmental objectives of the green bond. It puts forward what the selection process for those projects and assets to be funded by the bond, incorporates the internal procedures. So at the pre-issuance, how are you going to manage your proceeds? How are you going to be reporting? What can investors expect, etc. And then sign-off process so that there's appropriate internal endorsement of the information contained in the report. So you can see, if any of the investors are sitting on the line today, you get a very thorough internal process laid out by your issuer that is going to end up producing a report that gives you this information and security around what you are investing in. Next slide, please. So while that slide is loading, this one right here, the climate bonds taxonomy, I think maybe the buzzword of taxonomies is starting to hit in various markets around the world now. Taxonomy being a sketch out of all the investment opportunities, the green investment opportunities that can be identified across key economic sectors of our global economy. If we're thinking about energy, we're clearly thinking about renewable energy. Okay, we're moving away from a high carbon intensive growth industries into energy systems that are renewable. Transport, water. If we look at land use, we're looking at agriculture, we're looking at commercial forestry, ecosystem conservation, restoration, fisheries and aquaculture, and most importantly, even now in light of the COVID crisis, supply chain management. But this is just a snapshot. There's definitely more detail behind this. This is to give you a visual more of category lists. It is not exhaustive, right? There's a lot more here, and you can get that information by following into the Climate Bonds Initiative website that has the taxonomy, and our partners have access to that as well that can help follow you there. Next slide, please. This is, again, a snapshot honing in specifically into the agriculture sector, and again, not limited. And so hopefully this slide deck will be available to you post the webinar. But it is to give you a sense of, now let's have a bit of a focus on agribusiness. Well, what do we mean by green in the agribusiness space? You know, the headlines are increasing efficiency across operations, wherever the improvement of water use, pesticide use, fertilizer use, tillage on soil, better conservation practices on your land. Production is, producing more with less input. And that also includes land inputs. Where we're seeing, especially forested stated countries like Brazil and Indonesia, their biggest challenge is being able to meet global demand on their products and domestically, while also trying to maintain the land space that they already have. And this is something that, is the biggest challenge for the industry, where one can integrate sustainable agriculture production into their system is where a new set of investors sitting on a hell of a lot of money are looking to put that and connect that. You will see certain things around irrigation, precision agriculture, biological pest control. It goes without saying, mentioning on the locust outbreak that's happening in Kenya right now. And in a business of agri in Africa, a lot of it is more about resilience than it is mitigation. Keeping emissions in our practices at a minimum is key, but also resilience of the agribusiness system is critical. If we look at the locust invasion, which has now been clearly linked by scientists to climate change because of the unique extreme weather patterns that have formulated, this is the worst pest infestation in 70 years. Okay, the pesticides being used to try and control it, not biopesticides, has been killing off livestock. The impact to livestock related costs and damages will be close to 8.5 billion by the end of 2020. Resource-based conflicts, famine, these are all tied to what is the outcome of this horrible, horrible impact. When we talk about resilience in those systems, the agriculture systems for East Africa, we're going to have to be looking at how we get early warning systems in, how we better utilize biopesticides to manage these so that we don't have such an impact on our current scenarios of environmental ecosystems. And then, of course, we need to strengthen our markets. You begin to think and see how we need to become more clever rather than business as usual with many of these activities. Next slide, please. So it seems we might be having trouble trying to access that last slide. The last slide being that it was very much looking at different criteria parameters around mitigation and some highlights on criteria around forestry. Again, that information can be provided following the webinar where this presentation will be available to participants. But just to close before passing it on to my colleagues, is that there is a huge opportunity to leverage the green capital flows domestically or even internationally to be able to finance new ways of integrating sustainable agricultural production, which very much is about maintaining food security in the long term. The role that the local banking sector will play in coordination with central bank on putting in place the appropriate enabling environment to be fostering green finance towards the agribusiness will be key. Green credit lines, green loans, investment funds that are targeting for green, and also, of course, the role of development finance institutions being able to put in place catalytic funds that can help where there is high risk, where there is lack of scale. We need to be able to find ways of securitizing these opportunities so that they can connect themselves to investors. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope that that was valuable. And of course, once we get into the get into the questions, we'd be happy to answer any that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justine. That was very insightful, very enlightening. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Ade again. I had introduced him earlier, but we had some technical glitches. I want to apologize. I also want to welcome new participants. We're well over 150 participants now. We're live on YouTube. I want to welcome you on board, and I'll introduce Mr. Ade Adefeko. He's a Vice President. There we go. He's a Vice President, Corporate and Government Relations at Olam, Nigeria. Mr. Ade, please.
Thank you very much, Adaze. And I want to welcome everyone. And I want to thank Justine for her enlightening presentation. I think her presentation should have been preluded by my expectations of the webinar. But important thing to really note is, as you know, Adesi has already spoken to the fact that I'm into agriculture, agribusiness, and this is important. As a lot of you can see, I'm wearing a motif of green, just to highlight and to underscore the importance of the green bonds. But a few questions or a few expectations from those of us in the agribusiness sector with respect to these green bonds. You know, there are questions and expectations. And a few of them, a few come to fore. People talk about what kind of fund structure are we looking at? Is it cash, disbursement? Is it any risk sharing? And what kind of guarantee mechanisms do you have in them? Will a bank guarantee be required to access the fund? You know, is this structured as on lending through a financial institution, for example? Or is it direct exposure to the obligor, you know? So, and again, questions again that might arise are, do you have any preferred, you know, intervention areas across the value chain? Because of course, you know, some people are involved from seed to shelf. So which part of the value chain will you be financing? I mean, as you know, we're in unusual times. So what kind of collateral, for example, is required? What range of interest rate is applicable, you know? So are we talking about fixed rates, or are we talking about LIBOR, for example? So, and again, another question that is very key, again, we'll talk a lot about sustainability. So what is the carbon credit component of this bond, you know? And who will certify its conformity to our sustainability practices? So these are the kind of questions, or these are the kind of answers a lot of us in the agribusiness sector will be seeking answers to. And Bola Onodele, the CEO of FMDQ, set the tone rightly. He gave an overview, which was very, very apt, and he couldn't have said it better. And Justine has given us that insight and intro into what it is about. But to me, I think those questions and that framework I have come up with, or those expectations from participants, I think it will be important for answers to be offered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ade. In the Q&A session, the speakers will definitely speak to this, but it's good to, as a Kickstarter for the panelists and the speakers to know what the stakeholders in the agribusiness space are expecting out of this capacity building webinar. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Adas.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Victor Nkiri. Mr. Victor Nkiri will be taking us on driving inclusive growth in Africa. Mr. Victor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think I just want to share my presentation. I think I'm good to run it from this end.
Mr. Victor, should I run it, or you're happy to do it?
I'm happy to do it, sorry. Yep, I think I got it. So today I'll be speaking about why capital markets matter. And my name is Victor Nkiri, and a good morning to you, a good afternoon to you from all locations of the world you're logging in from. My name is Victor Nkiri. As I said, I'm a senior capital market specialist. I work with FSD Africa, which is a development agency funded by the UK Aid and with offices located in Nairobi, and we run projects across Sub-Saharan Africa. We currently have projects in about 26 countries in Africa. And we're excited to have partners and to be in Nigeria and doing quite a lot. And I'll speak more towards that. But let me start off by saying, by speaking to why do capital markets matter? And just off from that slide, you'll see that, of course, one of the main thing, it's quite obvious to start with that the capital markets matter because they create finance for development. And they address quite a number of global challenges. And one of the challenges is what topic we're speaking about today, and this is climate change. And this is addressed by capital markets in a wide way. Another challenge that is addressed through capital markets, and of course, is urbanization, whereby funds are pulled together to address different issues concerning urbanization. The next is diversification, whereby the diversified financial sector, whereby you remove the concentration from the current bank-dominated sectors, and you're able to have funds that are pulled from different places from the economy. Of course, long-term savings, that's what capital markets do. They create opportunities for investor-based, and these are pension funds, insurance, of your collective investment schemes, you have your retail investors who are all pulled together with long-term savings and money that is patient and capital that is patient. The other, of course, is the investment gaps that it addresses from infrastructure, housing, social sector to health. On infrastructure, I think there's a report AFDB did last year, and it had indicated the infrastructure gap in Africa is up to $130 billion. And only about 63 billion is able to be raised annually from the 130, which is less than 50%. So quite a big gap on infrastructure financing across Africa. Risk management, being able to raise your capital through local currency, from your local investors and from your asset owners who are ready to invest in you through the capital markets locally. So that reduces your FX exposure and your Forex exposure. You have ability to deal with certain financial crises in your markets, and you're not exposed to other markets, financial crises where you have foreign investors pulling out their cash if something happens and they feel uncomfortable. Fundraising pressures, of course, these are reduced, is what is happening. We are seeing a huge reduction on donor flows across Africa, and there's a constrained market conditions, the Euro bonds and all that. And therefore, again, the capital markets are able to provide a source of funds locally where you're able to raise money. That, of course, brings me to the next slide, which I'll talk about the local currency bond market. And this, of course, has been developing, and we have a vicious cycle. And I just want to pick up on something that I sourced from Dr. Ivan Sosano, who's one of our colleagues in FSD Africa. And he developed this, what is called the original sin in Africa, the inability to borrow in local currency. And this of course is because of underdeveloped domestic markets, financial systems. I think currently Nigeria stands second in the world in terms of debt market. This is through the FMDQ platform, and what work FMDQ has done in Nigeria is tremendously amazing, and has been able to develop the markets there, and you can access that. But many of African markets don't have a fraction of what Nigeria has in terms of development of the debt market. Their vulnerability to external shocks across different markets, and this reliance to external borrowing. This is borrowing in foreign currency and high dependence on foreign. So quite a number of things have been brought up. The AU, the African Union Agenda 2063, has tried to address this and encourage domestic resource mobilization. It has tried to push for traditional financial sources, source finances locally. There is, of course, IDA has gradually we've been moving out of that and reliance of that into commercial financing, whereby countries should be able to raise and finance themselves. And this is something we believe strongly in FSD Africa. The Eurobond markets have been quite unpredictable throughout, and the rates and all that. I think during this COVID pandemic, we saw some African Eurobond markets reach a yield of 50%. I think something we never thought we'd ever see. So this unpredictability of the Euro market has been quite volatile. The benefits, of course, of borrowing in local currency, which I will speak to much later. Climate finance. So basically what climate finance do, it helps limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, where there's it reduces the rapid carbon emissions that we've been facing throughout. Does it? Okay, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Adazi. No, okay, yes. So of course you have the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. This is the OECD, has estimated annual investment needs to be up to 6.9 trillion. Need to meet climate objectives by 2030. Quite a huge amount of money that needs to be raised to address all these issues. Is required mobilization of what is called blended finance. This is a mix of private and public funds, and climate finance has really been a driver for this, whereby both governments and private institutions have been able to do this. Government policies, of course, reduce risk of climate-friendly investment and mobilization for private funds. And you have your bond markets through green, social, and sustainable bonds that play an essential role in attracting private capital for climate finance. Attractions to green bonds. So I'll speak to both the investor and the issuer. On the investor side, you might be aware of the principles of responsible investment that have now over 2,300 signatures worldwide, and have an assets under management of over $80 trillion. So these are investors who have pledged to invest in any green instrument or any green asset that is being issued out in the capital markets. And the assets that are looking and chasing for green investments are $80 trillion so far of those who have signed up into the PRI. Sorry, just go back. So for the investors, of course, some of the benefits are the environmental benefits that the investors get from this. The investors also are satisfied with the ESGs, and that the investments are able to meet the ESGs and the mandates that follow that. That is the environmental, social, governance requirements. The investors also look into risk management and enable hedging against climate risk policies. The investors also get a lot of reputational benefits for investing in this particular kind of asset, and the investors improve transparency and enable deep engagement with different companies. On the issuer side, the attraction on the issuer side is to improve investor diversification, lower cost of capital, and this, I would say comfortably, and I have to put a caution on this because we're not here yet as Africa, whereby green bonds actually attract much lower yields. This happens more in developed markets, but we've been seeing comfortably an oversubscription on all instruments that are green related, so which is also a very positive confidence to the issuer that you will get the money that you're looking to raise. Investor engagements.
Yes, Victor. Mr. Victor. Apologies, I'm just trying to get his attention. Okay, sorry about that. I apologize. We've lost Mr. Victor there. I'll just give him a few minutes to see if he can come back. But he was talking about the attraction of green bonds, and that's very insightful. And so far, we know what it takes or what is required for us to access green financing. Well, we'll have to stop it there and just move on to the next presenter. Mr. Victor, can you hear us? I apologize.
Adasi, I'm happy. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Did you wanted to present on
I just thought maybe while we wait for Victor, I'm happy to answer some of the questions that are coming through. I think that, you know, there has been a lot of questions around especially the structuring component, the financial, and I think it's important to note that you know, everything still ends up operating exactly the same as whether you're talking about loan structuring, debt structuring, any different types of mechanics around that ends up being relatively the same. What we're just simply saying is we're leveraging what is already out there that is vehicles for financing the sectors, the business. What we're looking at most closely is the green component, the green opportunities. So we tend to get a bit lost on, we say green and all of a sudden it becomes these, you know, a discussion on innovation and new around the financial mechanics. And it's actually not. All of that remains to be exactly the way it would operate and probably still actually also endure the same challenges. You know, risk appetite for large-scale investors is very low. So de-risking mitigation measures is extremely important. And a lot of that comes from, you know, the development finance institution support, government support, where governments step in and even central banks stepping in who prioritize the industry for ensuring capital is going in a sustainable agriculture development. It would then be requiring, you know, the same type of expectation. So I think that's just something to highlight as we're hoping to get Victor online.
Well, we're trying to get Victor online. Thank you for sharing that, Justine. That's absolutely correct. It's just the same as structuring a plain vanilla bond, but just the green confidence that the use of proceeds and the impact he'll make. We do have some questions. We'll take those questions at the Q&A session. And you have the opportunity to respond to those questions. We can't seem to get Mr. Victor online. So we just have to proceed with the webinar. And I'd like to invite Dr. Gregory Jobome, the Executive Director, Risk Management Division, Access Bank PLC. Kindly share your success story with the participants here today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to FMDQ. Thank you, CBI, Justin, Libel. Thanks for all the support. Good to meet with you, Victor Nkiri, and Adaize. Thanks for a very well organized webinar. I'll try and share some of our experiences with the Green Bond, but of course, the history of the Green Bond usually does not start with the Green Bond itself. It's built on many years, about 10, 11 years of sustainability effort that culminated in the confidence to pursue the issuance of a Green Bond. So I'll try and share a bit of that story. I have some slides. I'm not sure if you're going to share from that end.
Access to the slides, so you share your slides. Or you send that in to us, because we...
Let me see if I can do that.
Thank you. You can just speak to it. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah, let's see. Okay. So I hope you can see this.
Yes, yes, we can. Yes.
All right. So a very brief background first, and then why we did the Green Bond, the benefits, the challenge, and some of the lessons that we've learned, because definitely we would like to see more and more issuers coming to the market, whether in the banking sector or in the non-banking sector, to drive market development in this area. So as a brief background, I'm not sure if you can see that. We did issue Africa's first corporate certified green bond, as Justin mentioned earlier on, last year. The purpose of the green bond was to finance projects that aim to minimize the impact of global warming, climate change, and all the other things that we've all been speaking about for a good number of years now. We felt it was important after 10, 11 years of sustainability work to be able to take that one step further, that it was not just a matter of working with the DFIs as part of raising dollars, but that it should become part and parcel of how we do our business. So it's an incredible journey. I'll be lying to you if I say to you that we've arrived there. It's the first green bond. It has to be the first of very many that will have to come. If you think about the critical mass of green bonds that you'll have to issue and green loans that you'll have to issue to be able to move the needle, then you really know that it's just the beginning. But anyway, we were keen to do it right, do it professionally, to issue a globally respected instrument that will be listed on exchanges locally and internationally. Now we've achieved all of that. We have projects in the areas of climate change adaptation and renewable energy. It's a 5-year instrument, 15.5%. Like I said, certified by CBI, thanks to Justin and her team, and aligned with the Green Bond principles as expected. It was also reviewed by a verifier. Part of the process is having a verifier and a rating agency to also rate your Green Bond issue, just like any other Green Bond. So that was a brief background. I'll very briefly touch on some of the benefits. I hope people can see this slide. There are several benefits here. There are 3 groups. One is for the society at large, for the investor, for the issuer. But I want to emphasize here that the most important stakeholder here is society. Everything that has green attached to it has to be about moving the needle as far as society is concerned. In our case, that's about Nigeria. So how do we build a future for our children, for our country that is more sustainable? And how can you do it using the instrumentality of banking or any other part of the market that you play in? Of course, the country, we all have our SDGs, our Sustainable Development Goals that we're working on. Green projects will play a critical role in helping Nigeria achieve its targets. We also want to reduce the impact of development on the environment. If you put development in inverted commas, sometimes development comes at a cost. And a few years down the line, you find yourself having to invest millions and billions of dollars to do a cleanup. Now that cleanup is a cleanup that happens at significant cost to another generation that really should be moving on in terms of progress, but they are stuck with problems created from the past. So every little that we do now will reduce the cost to society in the future. And this is fundamental, and it's one of the drivers for why we are doing what we're doing. Of course, for the investor, there are returns to be made. There are tax benefits. There are, the most important of all is it gives the investors an opportunity to contribute to moving that needle in exactly the manner that I described. You need every manufacturer in Nigeria thinking green. You need every builder in Nigeria thinking green. You need every bank in Nigeria thinking green. And the more of us that are thinking green, the more the decisions that will be made will have a green tint. At least to begin with, let us begin to do all of those little steps. And for an investor, investing green is part of them playing their own part in shifting that sustainability agenda for our country. For the issuer, of course, like Access Bank, it was a source of financing for a range of projects, so that you tick that box, it's a source of finance. You also have to be able to have projects that have a significant potential to be eligible, because a globally rated instrument, you cannot just do a green instrument and call it self-labeled green. It has to be verifiably green, and that means working with people globally as well as in Nigeria who have the capacity to make that judgment based on existing taxonomies. So that's very important, and we had to be sure that that was in place so that the benefits will accrue. Now, there are a couple of things specific to banks. Banks are part of the engine of many countries, especially a developing country. You need banks lending actively to be able to support funding for whether it's for agri, for manufacturing, for all the sectors that are around. Now, for you to do that in a manner that is future-proof, you have to do more and more green lending. So if there's any bankers on this call, maybe it will be 3 years, maybe it will be 5 years. But as time passes, banks will be required to demonstrate the extent of greenness of their loan book. Now, the greener your loan book is, I predict the lower your capital requirements will be. Now, various projects have been formed over the last few years trying to standardize how to measure the climate impact of your loan book. So if Bank A is doing most of their lending predominantly in areas that are damaging the environment, chances are they will be required to hold a bit more capital a few years down the line. And vice versa, the more green your loan book is, perhaps the lower the capital impact, because it's been recognized that there is a very strong relationship between a lot of environmentally related issues and even the performance of your loan book. So whatever Access Bank is doing today is future-proofing our loan book and our institution to ensure we remain relevant going forward. Of course, there are little brand points like reputational benefits, branding benefits, but those come as very, very secondary. Okay, now on the next slide, I won't spend too much time on it, just trying to okay. All right, so I've moved to slideshow. Okay, so on the next slide, again, a bit more information there. And the slide seems to be jumping about on their own. Okay. All right, this slide is okay. We can move to the next one. Okay, just a brief few words on the process. As Justine has done a lot of justice to this, I don't need to spend too much time on it. Basically, you need a green bond committee fully supported by the board if you want to issue a green bond. It needs complete buy-in by the board because most things that are required, especially from a regulatory point of view, they will demand board approval. So it's not something that you can do willy-nilly or, or a fancy idea. It has to be well thought through. We've been on this since 2018, but it didn't come to light till March 2019. So you need about a year's running time, and that's with a very intensive effort with all the stakeholders and partners that we work with to get it there. But we started off with a Green Bond Committee that has the governance responsibility for ensuring that all the boxes are ticked in terms of meeting all the global regulations and requirements that are involved in issuing a green bond. But the stages are more or less as Justin has elaborated. There's the earlier phases, your internal approvals, getting your Green Bond Committee up and running. The Green Bond Committee would typically have probably, depends on the institution, minimum probably 7 people, or it could be 15, 20, because you need all the relevant departments in the bank involved. As I keep telling people whenever I present, there is no department in the bank called the Green Bond Department. So typically you have to assemble people from all the different disciplines within the institution to ensure that you're able to achieve your goals. Then you do all the reviews, due diligence with all the agencies. In our case, we did a verification process with PwC UK, in addition to the CBI certification. There are a whole range of processes with different regulatory agencies, in particular SEC is involved, lawyers are involved. Altogether, I counted a few days ago, there were about 24 different counterparties externally that we had to work with to get to that point. Internally, we had about 10 departments involved in putting all of this together. So it is quite an intense process. And the first time you do it, you're always shocked. By every turn, you see that as you click it, things unfold and you discover, there's another 5 things to do here. It's another agency you have to deal with here. So with the benefit of that experience now, obviously, it gets easier as we move forward. The final bit of it is the post-issuance reporting. Again, it's one of those things that till you do it, you don't quite realize how onerous it can be. Again, you have to do it in line with global best practices with external verification. So you can't just say this was the impact of my project. It has to be independently verified, and we had to go through that. Again, a significant learning curve. We can move to the next slide.
Can you see it?
Okay, I think we can run through this very quickly. Yes, so of course, I've spoken to this already, and Justin as well, so I won't belabor it. Several things are important, but the most critical of everything is use of proceeds. That is what distinguishes a green bond from any other bond. If you take nothing away from this webinar, just know that use of proceeds is king when it comes to green bonds. Now, that use of proceeds is easier said than done. There are various taxonomies, various ways of being eligible. What you thought might be eligible, by the time the experts roll up their sleeves and look at the project, they say, sorry, it's not quite green enough for us. So it is quite an involved process, but that is what makes it interesting and what makes it tick the box for meeting global best standards. Otherwise, you'll be doing all sorts of things that seem to be green, but really you are not moving the needle in terms of impact on the environment. So that's critical, and we had to be sure that we had the proper backing for that process. On the next slide, challenges and lessons. This is one of my favorite slides because at the time they might look very challenging, but once you've passed that phase, it's no longer a big challenge. But for a new issuer, these are some of the challenges that they will need to think about. We were new to the market, so we had a number of different new things to do, working with all the different stakeholders, potential investors, manufacturers, regulators, exchanges, you name it, a very, very intense process of information sharing. You have to expose your loan book, you have to expose your processes, expose your governance structure, expose your approval standards and levels, who does what. All of that is part of a standard bond issuance process, but with a layer of green on top means that another 7 to 8 external parties are loaded onto the usual bond issuance due diligence process. So be prepared for that if it's the first time that you're doing it. It's a long process. Like I said, we had about 24 external counterparties to the deal, including lawyers and exchanges and regulators and verifiers and all sorts of different players. Within the bank, we had 10 departments involved. Again, it's an early warning to potential issuers. Whatever your sector might be, don't underestimate the need to carry a good chunk of your institution along. You will need your finance department, your risk people, if you're a bank. You will need your communications people. You will need your market-facing people who are going to market the instrument when the time comes. You will need your sustainability team, obviously. You will need, like I said, we had 10 departments involved, and that was just enough to do what we had to do. But the trick is to start early. We gave ourselves a very definite target, and that was the only way we felt we could move it. We said to ourselves, if we keep doing this thing little bits at a time, we will not get there. Let's set a date and work to it. So that was exactly what we did. And so we set those very tight targets, and perhaps that's what is required to force the actions to happen. Intense disclosure standards, so be prepared to share. There's no hiding place. You cannot come out and say you've done a green bond and you don't want to verify it to go through every nitty-gritty, including doing site visits if it's convenient or if it's not clear enough, including drawing on expertise globally. So the verifier comes, sits, reviews your loan books, reviews your customers' credit files, and then reaches out to other experts beyond himself or herself if they need that expertise, whether it's in Canada, or in the US, or in New Zealand, on that specific project that you want to be eligible. So it does make it very, very transparent, but just be prepared for that if you were not anticipating it. Now, one challenge is we had a number of verifiers that we could use, but none was based in Nigeria. And that we really wanted to make it as local as possible, even in terms of the investor community. As you will see, it's subscriber base is Nigerian. We wanted the verifiers to also have some Nigeria content to it in terms of location, but there was none. So that's an area for anyone listening who wants to build their competence in that area to get the necessary license to be recognized as one. FX risk is big for potential foreign investors. If they are investing in dollars, they want to be able to get their returns in dollars and repatriate their funds in dollars. So it makes the pricing a bit more expensive. If you're issuing in Nigeria, the dollar instrument, convertibility becomes an issue for them. And for the bank itself, you also have to then manage your FX risk, because if you're lending in Naira to a project in Nigeria, be mindful that you have to deal with that. So these are just some of the challenges, but like I said, they came from being the first time. So next time we do one, obviously it's going to be much tighter and much easier, I believe. On the next slide, just a few words of conclusion. But the most important thing I'll say here is the first one and the last point here. The first one here is a great instrument for inclusive development. The push for agri development is prime territory for green bond and green lending. The whole value chain of agri, if you think of the enormous list of different commodities involved here, and each one with its own value chain, each of those value chains have potential for green lending, whether it's in terms of rural electrification, getting some solar electrification in the village to support some basic farm work, whether it's supporting cottage industries in the smaller towns and even the big cities, agro-processing, storage facilities is a big deal in agri. Any cooling facility that enables you to transport and make your agri produce last a bit longer, most of them tend to be eligible as well for green financing. So there is a big template there for agri lending that can be green. But the final point I want to make is that impact comes from building critical mass. It's not enough for Access Bank to do a green bond or do green lending. Every bank has to do it. It's as simple as that. If you're a big manufacturer and you have the capacity, do your own green bonds. So it is from that critical mass that you move the needle. If it's one or two sporadic issuers here and there, a few investors here and there, you are hardly going to make an impact. So really, it's an area where it's not a competitive space, because all of us must actually come to that table in order to move ahead. And like I said earlier on, it might not be an option in a few years' time, It is possible, Justin, if I may predict, that in 10 years' time, nobody will be speaking about green bonds because all bonds will be green. I hope people can get a drift, because that is really the way the world is going. Most investors with big funds to spend, why would they do a plain vanilla bond? Because their returns tend to be very close. I mean, for now, you don't see too much divergence between what they get on a normal bond, what they get on a green bond. So don't lose much from doing a green. Why would they do plain vanilla? So as time passes, only green bonds will be there. And if you say green bonds in 10 years' time, people will be looking at what do you mean by green bond? All bonds are green. So, and for a bank, your loan book also has to get progressively green. So those are my concluding words, and happy to join in the Q&A at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for that. Very insightful. We have Mr. Victor Nkiri is back. We have some technical glitches. So he'll continue with his presentation. So I'll share that. Dr. Greg from Access Bank, thank you. The stakeholders now know that the use of proceeds is key. Thank you so much. Please stay back for the Q&A session. Thank you. So we'll go back to...
Thank you, Adaze. It's good to be back. Sorry about that, some technical hitches. Thank you, Dr. Greg. I think that was very well presented. You've made my work very easy. I'm not even sure I should use the presentation anymore. But I'll just continue running onto it. I think I was on this slide where I wanted to speak to the investor base in Nigeria, and I think Dr. Greg can attest that he has dipped into this investor base, and as you can see, the pension funds together with the insurance companies in Nigeria, you're talking about over $30 billion that are available to be invested. Of course, a green bond is a debt instrument, just as Dr. Greg has said, and it will be a normal bond. And these are a huge favorite instrument for these pension funds and insurance companies' funds that usually invest into this. Of course, the whole of Africa is estimated to have about 900 billion. And South Africa takes the bulk of that. And I've not included South Africa on this graph, and I just left Nigeria, which is second, of course, to South Africa, and shows the strength of the Nigerian market in terms of issuance of debt and the capacity that the Nigerian market has above all other African countries. And I think this is why this webinar was very important, and even to speak to the agriculture sector, just to show you that you already have investors sitting and waiting for you to issue a proper instrument, which they will definitely use. Next slide, Adaze, please. I can jump over this. This is just showing you in comparison with Kenya, Nigeria, and Kenya, where Nigeria is more than double in terms of assets under management by the pension funds. And you can see the favorite instrument that they seek. This is the bonds. And in this particular case, they go for the sovereign bonds, and 70% of that is invested in that. And then they have other asset classes that they have invested into that. So next slide, Adaze. Merits, I'll just speak quickly to this. And this is because Dr. Greg has already spoken to many of these. The merits of a green bond, the first, I think, it will be very clear, is poverty and poverty reduction. I think statistics from the National Bureau of Statistics in Nigeria showed that over 50% of the population live in poverty, and food comprises over 3/4 of the consumption basket for that. So food becomes a clear product that can help reduction of poverty if we can get it right. And again, why for we, the partners, FMDQ, together with Climate Bond and FSD Africa, this is a webinar that we were very keen on to speak to the agricultural sector to show you how you can create an immediate impact on this. Probably when I'm still on that, I can give an example from an agri case study, and this is of Datco Nigeria. This is a company that has presence in Nigeria, and it's owned by Fila Africa, and they focused on improving technology and growing and processing of cassava. They set up small mini factories across Nigeria, and they were able to process cassava, which of course has a very short lifespan from when it's harvested, between 24 to 48 hours. It needs to reach the processing plant, and they had small mini plants they had set up where the cassava would quickly be turned to cake, and then the cake cassava would be now sent to Datco's factory, which was a mobile factory, and this factory would now convert this into flour. And I think currently only Nigeria has a legislation whereby 10% of the wheat flour must be mixed with cassava flour. As you know, cassava flour is an ungluten flour, and Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava flour, of cassava in the world. Yet cassava is not exported or commercially harvested in Nigeria. So this is a huge potential for Nigeria, being the largest producer of cassava in the world, both in Africa, of course, and many other places where cassava can be planted, but yet we are not able to use such opportunities that we have. Of course, capital is a big issue. The case of Datco, they needed $150 million to do all this technological innovation of growing cassava and processing it. $150 million is not money that you would just get anywhere, but is money that you can access through the capital markets, and it's possible to get such an amount for you to come and issue. Second is the inequalities, of course, increasing inequalities in terms of access of opportunities, low social cohesion, regional economic imbalances. I need not speak more about this. Are you on the south? Are you on the north of Nigeria? Do you have better infrastructure? What do you have to access? Green economy, of course. Alternative pools of capital are available. I've spoken to that already. Your pension funds, your high net worth individuals who are very keen to promote that. You have flexibility and accessibility of this cash. This is long-term money. This is probably not money you would walk into a bank and they would tell you the best they can do is give you a 5-year loan. You can access a 15-year money in the market for capital markets. You can access 20-year money, you can access 30-year money, and you just need to justify, of course, the use of proceeds and the term of the project that you have. So the access of long-term capital is quite key. I'll talk about some risks, and these have been mentioned, so I'll quickly run through them. One of the huge risks and the issues that we face with green bonds is greenwashing, and Greg has talked about this. You cannot self-declare it yourself and say this is green. So, and that's why Justine was very clear that they have a clear taxonomy, and the taxonomy is just categories explaining how each asset is categorized and what is deemed green and what is deemed sustainable. Certification, of course, with climate bond there being able to certify. We now also have the European Union, which has created their own taxonomy, which probably would be adopted globally by most of the issuers. Complex impact reporting, especially when your instruments become a little bit complex in the capital markets, like a development impact bond or a social impact bond, then the reporting mechanism can be quite complex. Cost of the issuer, of course, you have to seek verification. And that's why the Nigeria Green Bond Program is here. That's why we, the three partners, are here, is to help you, cushion you from some of these costs. Would pay for your verification, would pay for your certification. Time, of course, is an issue in terms of verification process, which usually takes about 2 weeks or so. There's, of course, a small size on the non-benchmark bonds issuance, are unable to trade very well in the secondary market. You need a certain size of float for that bond to be attractive. Requirements, you need additional disclosure requirements. Of course, in terms of reporting, you need to do annual reportings on that, and they need to be consistent throughout the time of that particular bond. Next slide, please. So this is the Nigeria Green Bond Program. There are 3 partners, and we now also have another partner, FMDQ Climate Bonds, FSD Africa, and FC4S, I think, which onboarded this year. So we have the 4 of us who are focused, and these are some of the things that we've done throughout the term of this particular program. We've helped develop the guidelines and the listing requirements through the SEC Nigeria. We've helped develop a pool of licensed verifiers, and training has been done. We've helped to develop a pipeline to demonstrate to the market that it's possible. And through this demonstration, Nigeria became the first country in Africa to issue both a sovereign bond and a corporate green bond. So this is kudos to Nigeria actually taking the lead ahead of the whole of the African continent in this. Of course, we were able to support the Nigeria green sovereign green bond in the certification, and we're still continuing to support them in that. Next slide. Next slide, that does it. Thank you. So I'll just quickly explain what we, the capital markets team in FSD Africa, have been doing. Of course, work in these 3 kind of enabling structures, whereby we are an enabler, of course, through market policy, regulation, and reforms, working with the Security Exchange Commissions, working with the larger bodies, IOSCO, and all that. Of course, we demonstrate and help through issuance of capital, like we've done through Access Bank and North-South Power that issued those 2 bonds. We also investors, we invest our development capital because we have 2 investment wings. This is, of course, through the FSDAI investment, that is FSD investment wing. And we also have a subsidiary where another institution that we've invested in called the Africa Local Currency Bond Fund. And they invest in local currency bonds across different African nations. We build capacity, which is probably what we are doing in this particular webinar, helping to increase knowledge and awareness through different geographical regions, catalyze new partnerships. That is, we partner with local partners that we believe are champions of change, like FMDQ, which we strongly believe is a champion of change in Nigeria, and would be able to scale up and bring up new ideas in Nigeria. Thank you, Adaze. Next slide, please. This is just a show of the portfolio so that you can see that put our money to our mouth is, and we have skin in the game in Nigeria. So of course we have partnered with SEC Nigeria, and we are doing a couple of things with them, including institutional capacity assessments and strengthenings, which have already started. We have our Nigeria Green Bond Program, which is what we're speaking about here. We have FMDQ, who we've supported as a champion of change in Nigeria, the Nigerian market, and we believe in improving their capacity. We have professional certification through the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment, which is a London-based institution that offers international recognized professional certifications. We have money market through one of our investee. Again, we've invested into Frontclear, and Frontclear has also done quite some work in Nigeria through FMDQ. We have the ASEA, we've partnered with ASEA, the Africa Security Exchange Association, and this is, of course, to continue promoting issuance of security and assets through different markets in Nigeria. And we have the Africa Local Currency Bond Fund that I've talked about, that invested in North-South Power, that issued a corporate green bond. In Nigeria, we also have invested in Dufil Foods. Of course, as I said, we're very keen on food production and how food is able to reach out to the masses in Nigeria. Thank you, Adaze. Next. Oh, thank you. I think I'm done with my presentation, Adaze, and I'm ready for the questions.
Thank you. I just unmute myself there. Thank you very much. That was very enlightening. Thank you very much, Mr. Victor. Now we're within time. We're running within schedule. We have our last speaker, Mr. Emmanuel Etadiri. He's the Executive Secretary, Financial Center for Sustainability, Lagos. He'll be giving us an overview of the activities of FC4S Lagos. So I'll be sharing his slide now.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for having me in this very important webinar session that is focused on an important segment of the Nigerian economy, as highlighted by the Chief Executive Officer of FMDQ Group. Agriculture is a very important segment of the Nigerian economy. In fact, in terms of human life, it's about the most important segment because it speaks to the basic needs of food. My name is Emmanuel Etadiri. I am the Executive Secretary of the Financial Center for Sustainability Lagos. I was seconded by FMDQ to start that institution. This institution of operation this year in January, but as our takeoff date goes back to May 2019, when we applied for membership of the Global FC4S Network, which is a collective of 30 international financial centers with over $61 trillion in terms of market capitalization, working together to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. Speaking to the SDGs, as is known, agriculture speaks to, directly or indirectly, at least 7 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the key ones is about no hunger and food for all. You can check those out. And what sustainable finance speaks to actually is trying to incorporate economic governance, social and environmental principles into your everyday investment decisions. And the Financial Center for Sustainability Lagos is focused on driving the entrenchment of sustainable finance in Nigeria. So speaking to the Global FC4S Network, as I mentioned, it's about 30 international financial centers, and the key driving points are the fact that these centers have different areas of specialization that cuts across various sectors that could be beneficial to us as a nation. The objective is to enable financial centers to exchange experiences, drive convergence, and take action on shared priorities to accelerate the expansion of green and sustainable finance. And if you look at the taxonomy or the definition of financial centers, they are critical to mobilizing capital. You have major financial centers in the world that are well known. You have the New York, you have London, you have Hong Kong, you have Singapore, and several other financial centers that pull capital together to finance important aspects of the world's economy. Next slide. So as I mentioned, FC4S goes back to 2019 in terms of the takeoff date. It's actually a setup or an institution that was set up by FMDQ in partnership with the United Nations Environment Program and other stakeholders in the Nigerian capital, in Nigerian financial and capital markets. The membership structure across banking, debt capital markets, equity markets, insurance, investments, specialist institutions, policy and public finance institutions and organizations, local green initiatives, market intermediaries, and knowledge partners, as well as other critical stakeholders. Today, as of date, we have about 35 member institutions, and have a governance board of services. As Adaze mentioned, Mr. Bola Onadelikoko is also the chairman of the FC4S Lagos. We have 4 thematic areas that speak to
policy and regulation, issuances and investments, research, education, and engagement, and then those are the key thematic areas that we have. We have 3 ongoing partnerships. Basically, with the Nigerian Climate Innovation Center, already activated, and it works on climate smart agriculture and other initiatives that support the agribusiness sector in Nigeria. And the other partnerships in the making are partnerships with TDL in the UK and the Casablanca Finance Authority. Those are in the making, but they are relevant and important, and I will explain later. Speaking to climate change risk and agriculture in Africa. Now, Africa has 4 members in ECOWAS: Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya. But these, apart from Nigeria, these other 3 member countries have made giant strides in terms of climate smart agriculture, and that's why the slide tries to emphasize them. Now, we could learn a lot from mirroring or modeling or looking at what these other financial centers have achieved in Africa. And why do we have to do that? Because we all have similar problems. Climate change risk affects agriculture in Africa across 6 or 7 dimensions. Number 1, it can affect farmers' yields. Extreme weather conditions has a significant impact on agricultural output. Disease and malnutrition is also another key factor, key risk factor. Impact on water resources, effective and efficient water management is another risk factor. Energy generation is a key area of concern, and a lot of the agribusiness institutions depend on fossil fuel, which is gradually phasing out. Indeed, if actually well done, you could generate electricity from your own waste in your farm and produce renewable energy that is clean and that has less negative impact on the environment. Another key risk factor is the rise in sea levels. Overflooding can lead to wastages of crop, overrunning of farmlands. This is another very important key risk factor. Lagos, for example, is one of the small island countries in the world that is vulnerable to the challenge and risk of rising sea levels. And then finally, the risk on fisheries and aquatic life, what the SDG will call life below water. So as I mentioned in the slide, the agri sector in many countries in Africa has exposed these dangers, and it's only when you adapt, smart and big techniques that you could in the path to mitigate this risk and attune to them. Next slide. Next slide, please. So how can we be help of what issues that sustainable finance can bring to the table to assist you in developing your business? As I mentioned, we have 30 members across the world, 4 in Africa, including Nigeria. And because of the strides these member countries have made, we could leverage on the expertise for capacity building and technical training on sustainable or smart agriculture. They could assist us in the area of ecological farming practices, energy conserving practices, and natural resource optimization. It could help us to expand access to agri finance. The center will also lead you to members that are proficient in precision equipment and the use of Internet of Things, sensors, and actuators, unmanned aerial vehicles that can help you to track, monitor the performance of your crops if you're a crop farmer or livestock. And they also expose you to the technicalities of vertical farming, which includes hydroponics, aeroponics, aquaponics, and so on and so forth. And it also help us to target inclusive farming, which focuses on farming businesses that are run by women-owned enterprises. And of course, it will involve a vast youth population, with over 40 to 50% of the Nigerian population is within the age bracket of youths, and many of them are either unemployed or underemployed. As a country with 200 million people that is targeted to reach 400 million in the next few years, it is important that we entrench the concept of agriculture as part of our everyday life, in terms of employment use, in terms of food production, to at least guarantee food security because it will be devastating if we have a food crisis that will add to the existing pandemic that we have going on. But if that adds to the mix, then to be devastating for us as people, which is why we are emphasizing the need for us to expand agriculture, and not just expanding it the local way we've been doing it, but using modern techniques and modern methods so that we could improve both yield, minimize labor costs, and accelerate our profits. So that's in summary is what we start to make available to you in terms of benefit, leveraging the network of our members to expose you to modern ways of doing agriculture, climate smart techniques, and also access to finance. There are several funds available from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, in a list of which include the Global Environment Facilities, among several others. But for this program, our focus really is on how you can leverage the green bonds market to access finance for your sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Etadiri. He's the Executive Secretary, Financial Center for Sustainability, Lagos. That was another enlightening segment. Thank you for sharing your expert knowledge to all the stakeholders in this sector. All right, so thank you. Next on the agenda is the Q&A session. So if I may ask the panelists, are you all ready for the questions? We have well over 150 participants in this webinar. We're also live on YouTube. We have well over 130 participants on YouTube. I want to thank you all for being here today. The polls are going up, so please take time to respond to the polls. And I'll start with the first question. And the panelists, I'm sure you're ready to take the questions now. So we have a question from Mr. Vilma Palmer. He's asked, make sure that we have all the panelists with you. Yes. So he's asked, how can climate smart financing be provided for farmers, for instance, in terms of financing inputs and machinery? I'll direct that question to Justine, please. So
thanks, Adazi. I think I'm on, yeah. Yeah, good question. I think I get this quite a bit, particularly the work that we're doing across Latin America as well, and in addition to Africa, on it's always about the question on getting the money to the farmer. And I always try to explain this in sort of, there's three different pools, particularly when we're on the accessing of this market, which is for trying to explain, especially within the debt component of the space. So there's bucket A, and bucket A tend to be the big players, the big multi-conglomerates. If we're talking about, the Bungis and the Sygentas and the Cargills of the world, which are massive in institutions in this space that have very, very large supply chains across the world and in several different countries, several different continents. And so where they have those supply chains, they have a lot of movement in the space of sustainability. When these big companies make their own sustainability statements and targets for them as an organization, then how does that get trickling down across a supply chain that can run in the thousands, hundreds of thousands? It's complicated. And one way is, if we're talking specifically on green, if these conglomerates were able to issue a green bond, a very large green bond in the billions that hits the international, and that capital is then used to support their supply chains, which I refer to as the farmers that support their output, to be able to get that capital to them. And what that means is you've got performance-based solutions. So where farmers are, needing the finance to be able to finance the stuff they need to be able to meet the sustainability criteria or the sustainable agricultural practices, then it's a matter of those proceeds being allocated to those farmers accordingly. It's almost serving as a quasi securitization model. You could also look at it as a lending model as well, without the need to pay back, because it's based off of performance. And the performance of that supply chain in return ends up making a profit for the company to be able to pay back the bond, if that makes sense. Another way of looking at it is the Pool B. Pool B are the players that are they're large or they're medium size farmers, but they don't have substantial credit. They're a high risk. If they were to go and issue a bond or any kind of debt, it's unlikely that investors will invest because it's too risky. And so this is where securitization becomes really, really important. It also is where bank lending becomes critical. And I appreciate that the market, without it being green of any color, those options may still be quite challenging. This does depend on, the state of the capital market, the ability for banks to lend, and of course, the farmers that are being able to just meet the basic requirements for accessing that lending. Having said that, this is where the role of central banks and other intermediary regulatory institutions need to play a role in helping fostering the ability for that access to happen, prioritizing green lending, excuse me, to farmers that need it, to be able to equip themselves to the ability to get doing sustainable agriculture practices or climate smart practices. But also keep in mind the role that DFIs play, and we should be seeing more. We should be seeing more leveraging by the development finance institutions for helping establish markets and using catalytic funds that will then be another source of capital for farmers to be able to access, to be able to do this type of stuff. So I think that's where I'll stop. I'm sure some other ideas from our panelists to contribute to that question.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Justine. Now, we have a very important question. And this is from Nda Adaba. This person's asking that a lot of agribusiness potential issuers are not capital market ready. So how can the Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program, the implementing partners, how can they support in getting them ready for issuance? Now, I'm going to direct this question to Mr. Victor Nkiri. Mr. Victor.
Thank you, Adaze. That's a good question. I think the Nigeria Green Bond Program has focused and has been able to assist in a couple of ways. I think one of the ways I had mentioned is to reduce the issuance cost when you're coming to market and you would like to issue the market. The second, as I said, is building capacity. And you're right, there is quite a huge capacity gap in the market and understanding exactly what does green mean and what does even an issuance of a bond mean, leave alone a green bond, a plain vanilla bond. The issuance of that as an instrument can be quite daunting to some people. And basically what we've been doing and we've been able to do comfortably is do capacity building sessions. We can do bilateral sessions with any institution that would like to reach out to us. We are able to do that. I think Greg can testify. We did quite a number of sessions with them, with Access Bank, with him, with them as the senior managers, with them as a whole team, of all the departments that gathered together, and we spoke to them and did quite lengthy capacity building sessions for them to understand what they're actually getting themselves into. So this is something that we have and we can do. If you would like to reach out to us, then please feel free, reach out to us. We can customize sessions for you as an institution or for you as a team, and we'll be able to walk you through this process from beginning to the end. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We can't take all the questions. We'll definitely respond to some of you after the webinar. And also, Justine had to go. She had another meeting and to attend, so she's had to leave. And thank you all for answering these questions. Now I'll just give a vote of thanks. They say that knowledge is power. And definitely the stakeholders in this webinar today, I think they're going to have some takeaways and they get to go away with a lot of information. Now, this webinar is designed obviously to, as part of our commitment to build capacity and foster growth, the growth of the green bond and sustainable investment instrument across the country. So we're going to be doing a lot more of these webinars across various sectors of the economy. I want to warmly thank our host, the Chief Executive Officer of FMDQ Group, the speakers and the implementing partners of the Nigerian Green Bond Market Development Program, who have come from different parts of the world. We have CBI from the United Kingdom, we have Victor from Kenya, we have people from Lagos, and we have all participants from all over the world. Thank you for being with us today. And thank you also to the panelists for sharing your experiences with us today. A lot of interesting perspectives have been shared. This webinar has provided the requisite knowledge that the key stakeholders in the Nigerian agribusiness sector require to kickstart their intentions to raise green investment. And particularly, they now know that the participation of the capital market is imperative. I want to thank the members, the council members, and the members of the Nigerian Agribusiness Group. Thank you for being with us today. Representatives of the Securities and Exchange Commission, thank you for being with us. I also want to thank representatives of our Apex Bank, the Central Bank of Nigeria. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your patience. I thank the media. I thank Access Bank and stakeholders in the banking industry for being here today. And finally, I want to thank the management and the staff of FMDQ for making this webinar possible. Stay safe and stay well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ade. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Tadiri. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.